were dock workers and not capable of great and grave decisions, they could do what they could within the space that they could. And their work was to be followed then, of course, by that titan of Caribbean revolution and social reform, Fidel Castro, El Comandante, who worked then with that other great Caribbean titan, Michael Manley of Jamaica, well known perhaps to many of you. And of course our own father of independence, Errol Walton Barrow, who worked with Fidel Castro in the struggle for the liberation of the peoples of Southern Africa by allowing the planes that left Havana, Cuba, to refuel in Bridgetown, Barbados, in order to bring the troops in to Southern Africa, and in particular Southwestern Africa.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. This is Jamaica Reaction. If it is the first time to come across this channel, please consider to subscribe and also hit the notification bell so that you'll always be notified every time I upload a video. So my people, we have a great speech, and this is one of the most influential leaders in the Caribbean, and this is Prime Minister of Barbados, Mottley, and she's coming out to highlight some of the challenges that the leaders have to ensure. She reminds them of the challenges that most of the leaders, especially in Africa, most precisely South and Southwestern Africa, had to endure in ensuring that their country and especially the economy is liberated. And this is the message that she is sending across to the CARICOM community, and this comprised of leaders such as the Jamaican Prime Minister. So let's watch the video. I'll be back with more comments.
And then, of course, there was the decision of the Commonwealth heads of government. And I remember as a young law student in London, caught up in the fervor of the anti-apartheid movement and caught up in the passion of wanting to see your own imagery on television, because in those days you just didn't. And when we saw the students of South Africa week after week rise up to take their future into their own hands, it placed the pressure on leaders like Margaret Thatcher and others, such that by the time the Commonwealth heads of government meeting went to Nassau, Bahamas, a determination was made to establish the Eminent Persons Group. And in that Eminent Persons Group, co-chaired by Malcolm Fraser of Australia and Chief Obasanjo of Nigeria, it also included a woman who was to become the first Governor General of Barbados, Dame Nita Barrow, who came here as one of the 7 persons to determine whether there could be a platform for talks and for release in order to ensure that the ungodly and unconscionable actions of apartheid could be brought to an end. Regrettably, their work was to be stymied by the then government, but they were capable and able at the time to meet Madiba. And it is instructive what they wrote in their unanimous report about Madiba in 1986, and I quote, "Having visited him on 3 occasions, what was their assessment? That he impressed us as an outstandingly able and sincere person whose quality of leadership were self-evident. We found him unmarked by any trace of bitterness, despite his long imprisonment. His overriding concern was for the welfare of all races in South Africa in a just society. He longed to be allowed to contribute to the process of reconciliation." This was not post-release. This was not on the eve of release. This was still deep in the bowels of his imprisonment. And you know, I've deliberately decided to take a segue this afternoon before addressing the fundamental issues, because it is important that we contextualize the struggle and the values for those who refuse to be reminded, or who fail to be reminded, or who are not reminded, may well believe that this was as easy as dealing with the twinkle of an eye with the remediation and reparation of an awful thing. It hurt me to hear that there are some who believe that Madiba did not do enough, and perhaps worse for a few, that he might have been a sellout, all because what they believe, justifiably so, should be theirs today is not yet theirs. I've deliberately started this conversation this evening by carrying you back to the 1950s and stopping in the 1980s and stopping again in the 1990s. Because if there is any one single truth, it is that each of us runs our leg of the relay. And the baton is all that can be required of us to carry. And yesterday I had the distinct honor of going to the Foundation's headquarters in the Center of Memory, and of reading, and I feel so privileged to be given copies of the transcript in Madiba's own handwriting, and I shall treasure them as long as I have breath. But in reading his own assessment of where he was and what he believed had happened, in what was to become the beginning of chapter 1 of the presidential years, it was ironic that he started with the words, "Men and women all over the world, right down the centuries, come and go." Men and women all over the world, right down the centuries, come and go. What is more significant for me is that as he ended that first chapter, he also reflected on the fact that he sought at no stage for the fame that was to follow him, and that the notion that he could be regarded as a saint was one that he thoroughly rejected. And the last words, "I never was one even on the basis of an earthly definition of a saint as a sinner who keeps trying." My friends, we need to pause sometimes and to remember context always. And I do so because in a very real sense, that which I've come to address you today on too is the subject of a great struggle, and will be the subject of a struggle that will require many different people to run their different legs of the baton, of the race, to hand over the baton. And the example of Madiba is the example more than any other that I would want us to hold on to, because in so doing, it is the values, the moral compass that he provides that gives us both the strength and the capacity to run this race, which will be the greatest race that humanity will require of any generation. It stands out for me that at the very outset, courage was never lacking. It is a cause for which I am prepared to fight, but a cause for which I am prepared to die. How many of us can say that today? It was the moral fortitude of a man that determined that no type of offer with special conditionalities for early freedom would be acceptable, because what was required was justice. It is amazing that in the face of the gravest and greatest inhumanity, not just to himself, to his family, to his people, that the vengeance that would otherwise eat and force others into action was absent from his mind, body, and spirit. And as I just read to you from the evidence of the Eminent Persons Group, not conveniently so as an act of politics, but as an act of character, deep in the bosom of his imprisonment. And then there's the story that was told to me yesterday by Cello, as we looked at the photographs of what his cell contained. And I well recall my own visit to Robben Island 20 years ago. And all who, like me, have practiced a little criminal law in my career know that that is a common sight in colonial constructed prisons that had no sanitary facilities. And the humility of the man captured best in being able to ensure that when one of his own brothers was unable to take care of themselves in the most basic and human of ways, that Madiba performed the duties of cleaning for him. An example of servant leadership, if ever there is one. So forgive me if I have strayed a bit, because I believe that in this world where everything is instantaneous and quick, and where people expect results like that, we sometimes need to remind ourselves of the context of the struggles that we fight.
Reminds us of corruption in high and low places, only to remind us that because we have a colonial mentality, we see only the oppression that is above us and not the oppression that is among us, creating a culture of silence in the face of patent wrongdoing is not just acceptable, it is dangerous and it is destructive. And speaking up respectfully, and more importantly, speaking truth, becomes a civic duty of every citizen of this country and everyone who chooses to want to live among us, even though not a citizen. This applies, my friends, to whether we're talking about what happens in our home, our workplace, the church, the community, or even the block, especially the block. There is nothing to be gained through remaining silent when we know better. And to say it shoulda, it coulda, I didn't. Regret cannot be the platform to this country's stability, harmony, or prosperity.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. So something extraordinary is happening across the Caribbean, and there is a voice that has emerged that refuses to whisper while powerful nations continue to dictate the future of smaller states. And that voice belongs to Barbados Prime Minister and one of the Caribbean's most influential leaders, Mia Mottley. So guys, this is no ordinary political speech. This is a call for awakening Jamaica, a call to every CARICOM nation. And it is also a call that echoes across the Atlantic to Africa itself, Because guys, according to Mottley's message, the era of accepting unfair global relationship must come to an end. In 4 generations, Caribbean nations exported sugar, bauxite, oil, tourism, labor, and talent. Africa exported gold, diamonds, oil, cobalt, rare earth minerals, and millions of brilliant minds. Yet, despite possessing enormous wealth beneath their soil and extraordinary human potential, many of these nations still struggle with debt, unequal trade, and limited industrial growth. So how can countries blessed with so much remain dependent on those with far fewer natural resources? And this is the uncomfortable question that Motley repeatedly challenges the world to confront. She argues that independence is not simply about lowering one flag and raising another. And true independence means controlling your own destiny. It also means writing your own economic future and also ensuring that the wealth created from your resources benefits your own people and is transferred from one generation to the other. And for Jamaica, the message is unmistakable. Your greatest export should not simply be raw materials or talented young people living for opportunities abroad. And your greatest export should be value, innovation, finished products, technology, ideas created in the Caribbean, owned by the Caribbean, and sold to the world. The same message reaches every CARICOM nation. Together, guys, these island states may be small individually, but guys, in unity, they represent millions of people, strategic shipping routes, valuable natural resources, and one of the world's largest maritime spaces and enormous diplomatic influence. The united voices command greater respect than isolated ones. And then comes Africa, a continent overflowing with minerals that power modern technology such as lithium, cobalt, gold, copper, oil, gas, and these are rare earth elements. Resources essential for electric vehicles, smartphones, renewable energy, and artificial intelligence. Yet, guys, for decades, many African economies exported raw materials only to import expensive finished goods manufactured elsewhere. So, Mia Motley's broader argument resonates deeply here that countries should seek partnerships that are fair, transparent, and mutually beneficial, not relationships where one side extracts value while the other remains underdeveloped. She has often criticized what many describes as an unequal global financial system and lingering structure that resemble colonial era patterns where wealth flows outward while debt and vulnerability remain behind. And her challenge is not just about rejecting international cooperation, but about redefining it. She calls for partnership based on respect and rather than dependency, investment rather than exploitation, shared prosperity rather than one-sided gain. So Mia Mottley's message is ultimately one of self-belief, and she challenges Jamaica, CARICOM, and Africa to see themselves not as small players in a world controlled by others, but as equal partners capable of shaping global affairs. And the question is no longer whether these nations possess the resources. The question is whether they will unite, invest in their people, and ensure that the future generations inherit wealth instead of dependency. History has already shown what happens when others write your economic story. Perhaps now the Caribbean and Africa are ready to write their own stories. Do guys let me know what you think about PM Motley's remarks regarding to economic freedom as well as independence of Africa, Jamaica, and the Caribbean at large. So guys, once again, welcome back to the channel. Don't forget to subscribe, share the video, like the video, and drop a positive comment on the comment section below. See you in the next episode.